Diffusion, the international science radio show.
We have a bouncer on the doors of perception.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
It gets pretty exciting.
The myths, the truths.
Toxicology.
Astroseismology.
Magnetism. The dark side.
Genetically engineered potatoes.
Planetoid.
Planetoid.
I love that word.
This show was originally broadcast on the 22nd of August 2011.
Hello and welcome to Diffusion. Sit back and relax while we work together to bring you the best science show around. You're listening to Diffusion Science Radio on 2SER, broadcast on 107.3 FM in Sydney, Australia, and across Australia on the Community Radio Network. You can podcast our show on our website, www.diffusionradio.com. So this week, we're going to hear from Professor Simon Gaechter of the University of Nottingham about the psychology of cooperation.
The interesting thing is, can unrelated strangers who don't know each other, are they able to cooperate to the common benefit? And if you're outside my network, you certainly have no right to punish me. Yeah. So go home, leave me alone.
But first, let me introduce my hopefully very cooperative panel. We've got James Bourne, Mick Cavazzini, Julie-Anne Popple, and myself. So guys, have you heard any good news this week?
There's a species of butterfly in the Amazonian forests called Helioconus numata. Now, this particular species exhibits a really interesting form of mimicry, where it mimics another species that's rather unpalatable or toxic to predators, such as birds. So this particular species not only mimics one other species, but up to 7 different types of morphs.
The same animal can change, or just within the species, different
within
individuals?
The species.
Mm-hmm.
So within a population or within the species as a whole. Yeah.
So it's not like the T1000.
Not quite that advanced, but still pretty impressive, because most cases of mimicry, it's just one species mimicking another. But this one's mimicking up to 7 species, and not even close relatives too. It's mimicking species of a quite distantly related Melanea family.
What are we looking at here? A butterfly that can then change into a different type of butterfly?
No, it's still the same species, but it just looks different. It appears different, has different colour patterns on its wing. If the predator eats one, say, butterfly, and gets sick, it's not going to want to eat any more of those butterflies. So if in a particular region predators learn to recognise a particular wing colour pattern, it's going to strongly select for that wing colour pattern in that area. So you're going to see a lot of regional variation between populations, where some will exhibit one morph and others will exhibit another morph, and that's going to depend on what other species that are unpalatable are in that area. Its offspring could develop into one of the other morphs, because it's controlled actually by a super gene. So it's like a cluster of genes. It's like flicking a switch, you know. So cool. Certain genes will be activated in order to produce an overall morphology that's adapted to that particular environment.
Science made fascinating, weird, disturbing and fun. Diffusion.
And now on to our feature. So Mick, can you explain to me why we just can't seem to get along?
Well, I don't know if I can, but a couple of weeks ago I met Professor Simon Gaechter of the University of Nottingham, who was giving a lecture at the Sydney University Sydney Ideas Forum. And he started life as an economist, professor of macroeconomics at the University of Zurich, but now he's a professor of the psychology of economic decision-making. And this is because he uses classic sociology and psychology models to test why people do or don't cooperate. I mean, classically, you think of the selfish gene story that Richard Dawkins told in the 70s that would suggest that we should only take care of ourselves and our families because that's in our interests. Or even, philosophers like David Hume in the 17th century described Homo economicus, who's, it's rational just to be selfish. But that's not true. People do cooperate in some environments. And so he wants to know why, what makes people cooperate, and how do you get people to cooperate for the common good rather than the selfish motives. So he uses an experiment called the public goods game. And just to see if this really works, we're going to run through the public goods game with the 4 guinea pigs in the studio here. So let me explain. First, I'm going to give you $20 each. And at each round of the game, you're allowed to chip into the public pot. Whatever you chip in, obviously, that comes off your $20. And then I, the banker, will double that amount and then redistribute it equally. So every round you get some back from your little tax. And we play the game through 10 rounds, and we see who's prepared to give up something for the public good, but also that gets redistributed back to them, like healthcare, like good roads, like education, or who prefers just to keep the money for themselves to buy their plasma TVs and their holidays to Noosa. And just to make this a little bit more realistic so that we're not just playing with Monopoly money, there's a very tangible prize here in the form of a chocolate bar. I can't name the chocolate bar because this is community radio, but let me just say that it's in a yellow package with slightly pyramidal shaped pieces and a little nougaty caramelly bits in the middle.
And it's delicious.
So, if this isn't enough of a real life reward for winning the public goods game, I don't know what is. So let's kick off. Round 1, I'm going to get you each to scribble, so no one else can see. Scribble in the first box to tell me how much you're going to invest in the public purse. All right, now, hold them up for me so I can scribble them down. So James has been pretty generous. He's given me $10. Julie-Anne's given me $5, and Victoria, the mean girl, has only put in $2.
Trust the American.
So that's 17 all up. Oh, I'm going to double that. 34, divide that by 3. I'm going to give you back each $11. Another quarter comes round. It's spring is in the air. James, how are you feeling this time?
Look, I have to admit, I'm feeling increasingly less and less generous as I see the other people around me sort of stinging their way out.
Oh, gee.
And like at the start there, I figure, I'm in a high tax bracket in Australian terms. That's 49% of my income to tax. That's reasonable, but no. Maybe not everyone else wants to do that.
You feel like you're wearing it. So what's this brought you down to?
Look, I think a nice conservative sort of investment is 20 to 25% of what I have at the moment. But, we'll see if that trend continues through. So, look, I've got $26 as we speak, and I think I'm going to invest $6 of them $.
$6. So how's everyone doing? How's everyone balance book at the moment, James?
I've managed to hit $34, which is a solid return. I'm enjoying the interest that the bank's paying.
It's getting there. Julie-Anne?
I'm at 13, unless I've done my math wrong. No, it seems right.
You've done
13?
13? How's that possible?
That's possible.
You've been too nice.
Yep, been too nice, apparently.
I'm at 47.
Ka-ching.
I must be doing it wrong.
Well, no, maybe...
Maybe you're just doing it really, really correctly.
Really right. I've just been giving 20 to 30% every round.
All right, the summer cycle season comes around and everyone's feeling good. It's almost Christmas. James, how are you feeling?
Look, it's Christmas time, so I figure let's try and invest as much money as possible to try and increase my return. And I figure everyone else might be on that boat as well. So I've put $10 into the kitty this time around.
Good on you, James. What about you, Julie-Anne?
1. I'm feeling the pinch.
Ooh, only 1. You got to save up for all those Christmas presents, don't you?
I'm putting in $8. Steady and true.
Bit of variety here. $19 all up. Double that to get 38. I'm going to give each of you $14 back.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. How are we going? Around 9.
It's going okay.
What's going to happen now, James?
Oh, it's getting super competitive, but I'm going to go 15 this round.
Ooh.
It's not...
Yeah, I might throw in 20 this round.
Ooh, big pressure at the end of the game.
I'm putting in 15.
$100, that's $33 each. So pressure's on now. There's the sweat is tangible in the studio.
What do we got?
Show us the chocolate mix.
We're at round 10. Shall we do the big reveal?
Victoria, what's your final score?
129.
Ka-ching.
116.
122.
Oh, so close.
And yet so far.
Yeah, I know.
The chocolate's mine.
But really...
Damn accounting error.
So you can see the greed has all bubbled to the surface. Victoria is the proud winner of the chocolate bar, but really what we're interested in is not the final score, what people finally won, but actually how their behaviour changed over the 10 rounds. So let's quickly plot the donations that people made to the taxman over time.
All right, Mick, so how did we go?
So mouths full of chocolate. Let's analyse the behaviour that you guys showed. So Julie-Anne started kind of conservatively around the $5 mark, crept up to $8, and then sort of stabilised around $10, $12. James was pretty generous from the beginning, around the $10 mark, crept up to $12, $15. And Victoria, surprisingly, very mean and sceptical at first with $2 and $5 contributions, started whacking it out at $10, $15, even $18. But unfortunately, I have to say you guys have failed the experiment. Your behaviour was very atypical when compared with lab experiments performed by Simon Gaechter and others. Most people start out, on average, people start out around the $10 mark. And then as they see each round, they're actually getting ripped off. There's plenty of free riders in the room that are not chipping in. They get less and less generous. And on average, the donations trickle down to like $3 by round 10.
Why do you think that is? I mean, is it just that we're really bad at math? Which I think this experiment has also established.
Well, that's actually the question I asked Professor Gaechter. And his answer is that we are what he terms conditional cooperators.
Though we believe, based on our research, is that most people are what we call conditional cooperators, which means they are willing to contribute provided others contribute as well. So they form a belief, an expectation what others will do. Then they try to match that to some extent. And if they, and some people just never do that, they never contribute, because they see, because individually you always earn more by keeping your money. Collectively, everybody benefits if people contribute. And this is exactly the feature that underlies many of these real world issues that I was alluding to before. That there's a difference between private interest and collective interest. And this is mimicked here. And I think the reason why cooperation is, fragile or collapsing eventually has to do with the fact that the conditional cooperators realize that others are not chipping in or contributing or helping as much as as the conditional cooperators would like them to do, and then they are disgruntled and disappointed, and they reduce their contribution, and this makes the whole thing collapse. Yeah.
You're listening to Ian Wolfe on Diffusion Science Radio. Send emails to science@diffusionradio.com. We're brought to you across Australia on the Community Radio Network and podcast over the internet on www.diffusionradio.com.
So what do you reckon, guys? It sounds like you're more generous than the average bear.
Well, I think for me, a lot of it had to do with precedent. When I saw that Julie-Anne and James were putting in bigger amount of bucks, that really motivated me to increase my givings as well. If, say, Julie-Anne had said, nah, I'm going to give 0 every single time, I would have been pretty pissed off, and I probably wouldn't have contributed.
Well, and in fact, you're right. He says that even if you play the game just one round, but you tell people that everyone else in the previous round chipped in a certain high amount, they will feel some sort of social pressure to comply. So it seems like everyone's a conditional cooperator. But in the real world, you don't pay your taxes just because you're a nice person, let's be honest. You pay because you might get busted if you don't. And, the same goes for many real-world scenarios. So how do you think your behaviour would have changed if you had the chance to punish Victoria for being tight? If you could dock $3 of hers simply by chipping in an extra $1 yourself?
I think you've got more to lose. So you would definitely have to play much more aggressively.
For sure.
For sure, yeah.
That's capitalism.
Let's see what the real-life data says.
Yeah, in the public goods game we take a stylized version of this, and this means that it's a sort of a model of informal social sanctions, where everyone can punish, ostracize, criticize, ridicule anyone else. And in the experiment we make it monetary to make it costly for people to do it, which means that they have less of an incentive to do it, and certainly selfish people, people who want to maximize their monetary earnings, would never do it. And for that reason, we modeled it that way. And it turned out that many people were actually willing to do this punishing, which is an interesting phenomenon, because if you think about it, if punishment influences people's behavior, that is, they contribute more to the common good, then that's a public punishing is a public good. It's providing a public good because others will benefit. If I punish, I incur the costs and all the others benefit. So the question then is, if people are not able to provide the first public good, the underlying public good as we have discussed before, why then are they willing to provide the second public good? So theoretically, we shouldn't observe this punishing because it's costly, it's a public good, why do it? But people do it, and this public good doesn't deteriorate. So even if we repeat this experiment for many rounds as 50, people are still willing to do it.
So isn't that weird that people won't donate to charity, but they'll happily spend money to put people in prison? Obviously, in the real world, there are other complex psychologies at work and social pressures and so on. And Professor Gaechter even told me that if you just make people promise, say the words, I promise to do this, I promise to chip in that, it does make people more likely to chip in. But you can, because of all the cultural and social aspects, you can imagine that people in different countries might behave differently, right? I mean, I've seen 50 people in London queue for a bus stop. I've seen Germans standing on the side of the road waiting for the little green man, even though there wasn't a car in sight. Whereas in Italy, where I come from, forget about it. Everyone's in it for themselves. Everyone's trying to scam the system. So if you played the public goods game across the world, in Seoul, Copenhagen, Minsk, who do you guys reckon would be the least cooperative cities?
Without punishment, it was Melbourne, I have to say, and Athens, I think, and Nottingham, and Istanbul were the 4 least cooperative cities without punishment. With punishment, the situation changed completely. Athens remained the most selfish place. With punishment, Nottingham and Melbourne increased their contributions a lot, and Istanbul also remained at very low levels. So this is fascinating because these participants, they all play the exact same game. So the stakes are the same, everything is exactly the same. They behave very similar without punishment, they contribute little. You add the punishment option, they behave very differently, radically differently. Which is, and when this is just fascinating. And it seems to have to do something with the society-wide social norms. But how exactly and why and so on, we don't know yet, but we have the data and they seem to suggest this.
Well, it is surprising indeed that the behaviours separate along, let's say, cultural or ethnographic lines. You've actually surveyed attitudes towards these norms of civic cooperation in a worldwide survey. What kind of questions did you ask and what did you find from these studies?
So it was not me who did this. This is the so-called World Values Survey, which is run in 60, 70 or 80 countries by now all over the world, sampling representative populations, representative samples from these different societies. And they are asked things like, do you think it's justified to evade taxes? Do you think it's justified to dodge fares on public transport or to claim welfare benefits you're not entitled to? Some people rate this, how justified it is to do these things. These are the data we use in our study because the countries around the world differ quite a lot along these dimensions. But they are interesting because they reflect, that's our argument, they reflect society-wide levels of social norms of cooperation, because all these issues in tax morale, public transport, the welfare system are public goods, are real-world public goods. If people don't pay their taxes, then this means, they might be, because nobody can be excluded from going to the hospital or using public transport or the roads and other public infrastructure, but if they don't pay their taxes, this means they are free riding on those services that others have somebody has to fund them. And we thought these attitudes that people hold here, they reflect how the social norms in a society work with regard to these issues.
I always knew it. Melbourne's a stingy, miserable, rainy place.
But they respect authority.
It'd be interesting to see how this sort of mapped in a place like Pyongyang or like old school Stalingrad or Leningrad or somewhere where the monetary system is almost foreign to people just because of the way that the state controls all the affairs.
Well, actually, to be fair to Turkey and to Istanbul, according to this World Values Survey, they seem to know that cheating on the bus or cheating taxes is wrong, but they have little trust that the system will do anything about it.
Is it like a fear of being swindled by a corrupt government? Because obviously that would decrease your motivation to pay taxes.
I think that's it, that they don't think anything will be done about it. But finally, I guess what we really want to know is what this experiment tells us about real-world interactions. How can we predict or change the way people behave with real-world problems like tax evasion, or the biggest one of all, the question of climate change? He calls this the biggest public goods game of all. Does this model suggest that you need some global policeman to sanction against those that don't help out in cutting their carbon emissions?
I mean, sanctions definitely will not work. I don't think we can use them. We'd have to have some other solution. Because, I mean, the United States, just as an example, they will never accept any sort of, whatever the government is, I think. Who knows what happens in 50 years, but... they have not accepted the International Court for war criminals and things like that, so they don't want to do this. And the Kyoto Protocol was in place. It was broken by many countries, not just the United States. The United States never signed it. So I don't think that enforcement will work in through sanctions much. But I do think is what the West ought to do is to setting a good example and to move ahead by showing that they are doing something, and that they do their part, and then maybe they can convince in a few years the developing countries. Yeah.
So in the terminology of the game model, in the public goods game, do you believe that if a culture does start to develop of individual sacrifice for the public good, does your game model give you any hope that others will follow suit, or will the cooperation fall apart regardless?
Well, I mean, it's always going to be fragile. I mean, that's what I believe, and it has to be sustained by maybe to some extent by strong social norms. In some aspects, for example, there is hope. In many European countries, there are strong norms again in favor of recycling, not just throwing your waste somewhere. And it took a while to establish those norms, but now they more or less work. So it's not impossible to change norms, but I think it's a very, very difficult problem, because it has to be done at the country level, then you have to enforce it at the local level somehow, which is politically difficult, because I mean, people on the street, they say, why should I not use my car? And the big companies are allowed to,
the same psychology manifests at the local level.
I think that will happen. So people say the conditional cooperation. So everybody, I think the trick of this is to ensure that most people, majority, play the game and play their part, and particularly the big players. I mean, I don't think without the United States and Europe, particularly in the United States, not being on board in this climate thing, I can't see how this will work very well. I have to say I'm a bit skeptical from what we know from the behavioral economic side. But I do think is what the West ought to do is to setting a good example and to move ahead by showing that they are doing something, and that they do their part, and then maybe they can convince in a few years the developing countries.
Yeah, that was really interesting to see the way that this situation applies, I think, for us to the current political climate in Australia surrounding the entire climate change issue.
Yeah, you see it quite predominantly. I mean, when politicians look at what Australia's contributing in terms of carbon outputs relative to what other countries are contributing, you see the argument a lot in the media, why should we reduce our emissions by X% if such and such a country isn't reducing their emissions by X%. So it's a very similar psychology that's happening on an international country by country scale.
So I wonder if that makes Australia and the US the Athens and the Turkey of the example, that we just won't respect the social norms.
Unless maybe you could get sent to jail for not cutting your carbon emissions by a certain percent domestically. We could somehow make that uniform across the world or something. when you're relying on people to just do it out of the good of their heart for the future of the planet, there's always going to be that sort of vision of my money in the here and now. So, yeah.
Well, but there is that small window of social norms. If actually Europe and China might be doing more, then gee, maybe we're obliged to chip in a bit better, which is what you guys were saying when you were playing the game, right? I didn't want to be the seen to be the stingy one.
But there need to be sanctions associated with being the stingy, or seen to be the stingy one. I mean, what has America really lost from not ascribing to the Kyoto Treaty?
Just a lot of respect. But other than that, nothing really.
I'm afraid we haven't solved any global problems for the time being, but that was Professor Simon Gaechter, who has a lot of interesting things to say about why we do or don't get along.
And that's all the time we have for this week on Diffusion. I'd like to thank our guinea pigs, Mick Cavazzini, James Bourne, Julie-Anne Popple, and the show was co-produced by Mick and James this week, recorded in the studios of 2SER, broadcast in Sydney on 107.3 FM and across Australia on the Community Radio Network. Remember to podcast our show at www.diffusionradio.com and email your suggestions and glowing feedback.
Send your contributions, opinions, helpful suggestions and donations to science@diffusionradio.com. That's science@diffusionradio.com. Please subscribe to the Diffusion Science Radio channel on youtube.com/c/Diffusion Radio and rate the show on iTunes. Tell your friends.
Do make sure to join us next week for more Science Wondering on Diffusion Science Radio.
Science is fun. It helps you to learn, to know, and to appreciate. When you study science, you may go on field trips. You discover the marvelous interrelationships between all living things. You learn to read the history of the Earth as it is written in rocks and fossils. You find out what makes things tick, everything from a molecule to a living organism. In the study of science is found the most useful and satisfying knowledge of man. Knowledge of his physical world, its past, its present, and its future. And in your moments of relaxation, now and in the years to come, you will find the study of science leading you into fascinating pursuits. Photography, collecting. Why study science? Study science because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.